the lab diagnosis of viral diseases. So why we want to diagnose the viral infections? So objective of this lecture is to make the students familiar with the various methods of diagnosis of viral infections. So at the end of this lecture, you will be able to know how the viral diseases are diagnosed, why there is a need to diagnose the viral diseases, and which materials are required for the diagnosis. So first thing is materials which are required for diagnosis is first and foremost is the specimen. So specimen collection is done according to the site of involvement, where the viral infection causes its effects. Then the media. So in case of viral media, the inanimate media are not suitable for them. They don't grow in inanimate media. So the living media are required. Then different methods are there for viral diagnosis and advantages and disadvantages of different methods. So why the diagnosis of viral diseases is important? First objective is to screen the viral infections. So in routine practice, we screen the blood donors for hepatitis B virus, hepatitis C virus, and HIV infection. Then for menopausal and elderly women are screened for HPV infection to rule out or to know about their risk for the cervical carcinoma. Then pregnant women are screened for TORCH group of infections, that is toxoplasma, rubella, cytomegalovirus, and herpes simplex. Then tuberculosis patients, they are prone to HIV infections, so they are screened for HIV infections. So that was for screening of viral infections. Then is detection of virus infections. So it is the most important objective, that is detection of viral infections. Then we also do the diagnosis of viral diseases for epidemiological purposes, like in prediction and determination of epidemics, for example, poliovirus epidemics. So serosurveillance is done to know about the status of any community, whether they have antibodies against them, that is, whether they have herd immunity against the particular diseases. Then, so that we can, accordingly, we can plan the interventions, like whether this community requires the vaccine drive or whether they have a high level of herd immunity or low level of herd immunity, whether they are at risk. Then in prompt control of epidemics. So whenever a cluster of cases occur at any point of time in any community or in any area, it heralds the onset of an epidemic. So if you do the early diagnosis of early cases and do the interventions according to the disease, then the containment of that epidemic can be done and prompt control can be done. Then identification of antigenic variations in viruses. Viruses are known for having antigenic variation, like in influenza virus. So for epidemiological purposes, which strain, which serotype is prevalent in that particular area or that particular city or state or country, this is done for epidemiological purposes. So again, this virological methods of diagnosis are used for this purpose. Then we can define etiology of re-emerging and emerging viral infections. So some diseases are there which they remain silent or latent for a particular period, then re-emerge. So these are re-emerging infections, and if we diagnose them early, then we will be able to know that these diseases are re-emerging. So most important tools for diagnosis or the material required for diagnosis, specimens, media, and methods. Then there are certain factors which affect viral testing. So like the time of collection during the course of disease. So the disease course is different in different diseases. So usually in the first week, the antigen detection or the molecular detection of the antigen or RNA or DNA of the virus gives the more reliable results. So timing of collection during the course of disease is important. For example, in dengue, if you collect the sample for PCR, then you should collect the sample in the first week of the disease, because after the first week of disease, the antigen test or the PCR or the molecular tests or NS1 antigen testing will not give positive results. So in second or third week, usually we do the antibody testing. So time of collection is important. Then collection of appropriate specimen is important. So those diseases which have viremia, the presence of virus in the blood, like in HIV. So the blood is used as the specimen. For nasopharyngeal viruses like swine flu or COVID-19, most important sample is the nasopharyngeal swab. So collection of appropriate sample is important. Most of the time, like in torch infections, we collect the blood sample. For hepatitis samples, HCV and HBV, hepatitis B and C, we will collect the blood sample. For hepatitis B, antigen detection, HBs, AG detection. For HIV, hepatitis A and hepatitis E, if we want to detect antibodies, then also we will collect the blood sample. Okay, so the collection of appropriate specimen is important, and it affects the diagnosis. Then quality and amount of specimen, as the appropriate quality, whichever appropriate quality of the sample should be taken, amount should also be appropriate. Then transportation is important. We'll discuss all the points in later slides. Then duration between collection and testing. So as early as possible after collection, the sample should be transported to the testing laboratory. Then storage in case of delay in immediate transport. If this is not feasible to transport the specimen immediately to the testing laboratory, then it should be stored in proper conditions. Okay, so this flow chart shows a natural history of the disease and at which time or which point we can do the different tests for viral diagnosis. So when the virus enters into the body, first there is a period which is known as incubation period, where usually the symptoms are not there, but the virus is present and multiplying in the body. So here we can, at this period of time, we can detect the virus or virus subunits, usually by the PCR or the molecular testing. Then if after multiplication large numbers, it enters into the blood. Most of the viruses enter into the blood, leading to primary viremia. Okay, at this time we can do virus culture. So if you culture the virus at this time, then it will be positive. Then from after primary viremia, it enters into the tissues. So after tissue entry, it causes secondary viremia, and so in the first, after viremia, when the tissue entry occurs, here we can detect the virus from the tissues, fluids and other sites. Then if secondary viremia occurs, then serological diagnostic methods are used, because at this time, at this juncture, antibody titers rise. So here with the serological diagnosis by antibody testing is done. Then when it reaches the target organ, virus shedding occurs. So here these are the flow chart which shows that at a different point of time in the viral pathogenesis, which tests can be done. So this is the table which shows the different type presentation and accordingly what specimens to be collected and which viruses can be found to be associated, and any other special remarks. So in coryza or common cold, throat swab is collected. In pharyngitis also throat washings. In croup, nasopharyngeal swab, bronchiolitis, nasopharyngeal aspirate, pneumonia, tracheal aspirate, pleurodynia, then lung aspirate or biopsy. And so all these upper respiratory tract infections are there. Here we can collect the throat swabs or nasopharyngeal swabs mostly. And viruses which are found to be associated with respiratory tract infections are rhinovirus, influenza A and B virus, adenoviruses, parainfluenza viruses 1, 2, 3, respiratory RSV or respiratory syncytial virus, herpes simplex or HSV, enterovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, coronaviruses, cytomegalovirus, Coxsackie A and B virus, and ecoviruses. So all these viruses can be found to be associated with respiratory infections. So out of which this coronavirus, that is SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 is being wreaking havoc in the society as a pandemic. So here also we collect the nasopharyngeal swab for RT-PCR testing. In case of certain upper respiratory viruses, the rectal swab is used, like in case of Coxsackie virus and enterovirus infections. And rising titer of antibody in paired sera of patient is used in diagnosing few viral infections. So a single test of antibody is not much of importance. If we collect the two samples 15 days apart or 2 weeks apart, these are known as paired sera. And if there is a rising titer or falling titer, then it makes sense that it indicates that the acute infection is going on. Now certain viruses affect the central nervous system, and clinically they will present as aseptic meningitis and encephalitis. Specimens obviously will be cerebrospinal fluid, feces or rectal swabs, some cases nasopharyngeal specimens, brain biopsy, urine and sputum, serum. The viruses which are found to be associated with CNS infections are ecovirus, Coxsackie AB, HSV1 and 2, mumps, adenovirus, enterovirus, rabies, measles, CMV and Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr virus. Here, in some cases like measles and mumps, urine is also used for diagnosing the CNS infections. Then gastrointestinal infection like diarrhea, hepatitis, parotitis. Here feces or rectal swab or nasopharyngeal swab, urine and serum are used. Associated viruses are rotavirus, adenovirus, calicivirus, astrovirus, hepatitis group, mumps, EBV and CMV. Cutaneous infections like vesicular rash, macupapular rash, petechial rash can be seen. Here the aspirate or swab is taken from the vesical fluid. Nasopharyngeal aspirate can be taken or rectal swab. Serum sample is used. Associated viruses with cutaneous manifestations are HSV 1, 2, then VZV, it's a varicella zoster virus, ecovirus, Coxsackie, then HHV 6 and 7, adenovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, dengue, measles, rubella, hemorrhagic fever viruses. Then cardiac system causing myocarditis and pericarditis. Here again nasopharyngeal aspirate, swab, feces, rectal swab, urine serum can be used. The cardiac system is affected by Coxsackie virus A and B, ecovirus, adenovirus, herpes simplex 1 and influenza A and mumps. And in mumps, urine can be used for diagnosis. Then urogenital system where hemorrhagic cystitis occurs caused by adenovirus and HSV1. Sample is urine. Then ocular infection where the keratitis and conjunctivitis occur. Here the conjunctival swab is taken, corneal swab is taken, nasopharyngeal aspirator swab is taken, HSV1, then varicella zoster virus, adenovirus and measles swabs. Then congenitally acquired viruses causing like rubella, cytomegalovirus and HHV. The throat swab is taken, products of conception, sera of mother and infants are taken. Now the collection of specimens. For collection, swabs if are used, then Dacron, rayon or nylon swab should be used. Calcium alginate or cotton or wooden stick swabs should not be used. For collecting feces, urine, serum, sterile body fluids, tissues and vesicular exudates, all these samples are to be placed immediately in viral transport medium. Okay, so all these samples are transported into the laboratory through placing them in the viral transport medium. Okay, and they should be refrigerated immediately. Okay, so ideally all the samples collected should be transported to the lab immediately without any delay. For high viral load, so higher viral load is maintained in the specimen if they are transported immediately to the laboratory. So if there is a delay, if it is possible to transport the specimen to the lab in less than 24 hours, it should be kept at 4 degrees centigrade. If there is a delay of more than 24 hours but up to 72 hours at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, and more than 72 hours, then it is minus 70 degrees centigrade. Important points to be considered, that all these virological samples, there should not be any repeated freezing or thawing. Then the quality of the sample deteriorates. The specimen should never be left at room temperature on an incubator. The specimen should not be frozen at minus 20 degrees centigrade. Then the transport of specimens. There is a method which is known as triple packaging method. If you want to transport the sample to the testing lab from one area to one place to another, then it should be safely transported in a method by a method known as triple packaging method, where primary receptacle is the sterile leak-proof container, which is screw-capped and tightly sealed. Then there is a secondary receptacle. The first receptacle or the first vial is placed in the secondary receptacle, which has an absorbent material like a cotton, and it is watertight. Then out of these two coverings, the third covering or third packaging, outer packaging is there, where we can use both dry ice as well as wet ice. Wet ice and dry ice can be used to keep it at to make the use of both dry ice as well as wet ice. Then to maintain the temperature, to maintain the cold chain, then permit the release of carbon dioxide, and it should be leak proof, and itemized list of contents in the sealable bag. So whatever details of the sample and any requisition letter you want to send, it should be separately in a sealable bag. Plastic seal. It should not be kept with the sample inside. Then it should be kept in a suitable viral transport medium, that is VTM. The viral transport medium constituents are the protective protein like bovine serum albumin, gelatin, skimmed milk, lactalbumin and sera. Then we add antibiotics to control contamination, that is bacterial contamination is avoided by adding antibiotics. Then control buffers are added to control the pH. Here we can use Hank's balanced salt solution and phosphate buffer saline. So these are different viral transport media: the cell culture medium, Stuart medium, CVTM, modified Levobird's Amorim medium, skimmed milk based medium, HH medium, bentonite containing media, and SPG. Now after reaching the lab, how the diagnostic methods are applied. So these viral diagnostic methods can be either direct methods like microscopy, where we can directly see the virus or its derivatives. Then molecular methods. Then viral cultures can be done. Then the indirect methods are the serological method, where you don't detect the virus itself, but indirectly you have the evidence of infection. So first one is the microscopy. Diagnostic methods of microscopy include light microscopy and electron microscopy. So light microscope, because virus is too small to be directly seen by the light microscope. So here we see the indirect evidence of viral infections like cytology, which provides strong evidence of tissue involvement in viral infections, where we can see the inclusion bodies and multinucleated giant cells. These are all inclusion bodies. The table shows different types of inclusion bodies of different viruses. So if we define the inclusion bodies are structures with distinct size, shape, location and staining properties that can be demonstrated in virus infected cells under light microscope. So these are typical for a particular virus. Okay, so if you see inclusion body of that type, that description, it means that this virus has caused the infection. So intranuclear inclusion bodies are found in the different viruses. If it is the Cowdery type A inclusion bodies are produced by HSV, and that is a herpes simplex virus and the varicella zoster virus. Cowdery type B is produced by polio and measles. Taurus bodies are produced by yellow fever. Others like CMV and adenoviruses. Then intracytoplasmic bodies like Negri bodies are produced in rabies infections, Guarneri bodies in smallpox infection, and Henderson-Pitterson bodies in molluscum contagiosum. And other intracytoplasmic bodies are found in RSV, that is respiratory syncytial virus. Then both the intranuclear and intracytoplasmic body is known as Warthin-Finkeldy antibodies found in measles. So these are the preparations which show the different type of inclusion bodies. The zinc preparation is done for the varicella zoster virus. Here the Giemsa staining is done. This smear is known as zinc smear. It is taken from the material is taken from the vesicular lesions of varicella zoster, and a smear is made and then stained with Giemsa stain. This is known as zinc smear. Where, in this we can see the multinucleated giant cells, and the nuclei show ground glass and molded or multifaceted appearance. This is typical of varicella zoster virus. Then in hematoxylin and eosin preparation also for cytomegalovirus pneumonia, we take the sample from lower respiratory tract in case of cytomegalovirus pneumonia and make a hematoxylin and eosin stain preparation. It reveals basophilic intranuclear inclusion bodies. The inclusion bodies are surrounded by a halo in formalin-fixed smears. Here you can see the owl-eyed appearance, and that's and surrounded by a halo. That's why they look like a owl eye. So this is known as owl eye appearance in cytomegalovirus. Then Negri bodies, as I told you, these are the inclusion bodies of rabies. Here hematoxylin and eosin stain preparation of a brain biopsy tissue reveals intracytoplasmic eosinophilic inclusion bodies in the neuronal cells. This is characteristic of rabies infection. Then Warthin-Finkeldy giant cells, here the hematoxylin eosin preparation is made of lymphoid tissue. Here we can see the multinucleated giant cells containing more than 100 nuclei. Okay, so these are found in the measles. Warthin-Finkeldy giant cells are found in measles. Now, so as the light microscope, we cannot directly see the viral particles. We can see the inclusion bodies. So for seeing, for examining or demonstrating directly the viral particles, we require electron microscopy. This is a rapid method for direct detection of viruses in infected tissue. Advantages: it is rapid, actual virus can be visualized, no viable virus required, and it helps the detection of non-cultivable or fastidious viruses. The viruses which cannot be grown in culture, they can be seen directly by the electron microscope. But there are some disadvantages also. Here the cost and complexity of maintenance. Electron microscope is a very costly equipment. Here maintenance is also very high, and there is a need for skilled operator. Everybody cannot operate it. A trained person is required which has the expertise for operating this microscope. Then it has a low sensitivity, and high viral load is required for detections. When there is a high viral load, then only the virus can be directly visualized under microscope. So more than or equal to 10 to the power 5 virus particles per ml is at least the concentration should be there in the fluid or in any medium. Then only this will be visible in electron microscope. 10 to the power 5 virus particles per ml. The electron microscope has a principle that it is based on the use of beam of electrons within an electromagnetic field to magnify the object to be visualized. And types are transmission electron microscope and scanning electron microscope. So this was about the direct detection of the by visualization of bodies or the direct microscopy by electron microscope. Then nowadays, which are most popular methods and most available methods are the molecular methods. Okay, so here also we can do the direct and rapid detection of viruses based on detection of the viral nucleic acids. Okay, this has various advantages. There is very high sensitivity, rapid turnaround times, that is we get the report in less time, then ability to detect non-cultivable or fastidious viruses, detection of virus present in low concentration also, we can detect in low concentration also, then best for detection of slow growing viruses, because if you want to culture it and they are slow growing, then they take much a longer time. So here is we directly detect the virus, don't need to grow them. Then detection of viruses which show antigenic variation also. Various molecular methods are like nucleic acid hybridization techniques. There are two types of these techniques, southern blot and northern blot. Then amplification techniques where the signal amplification done or nucleic acid amplification is done. Then microarrays. Certain disadvantages are also there for nucleic acid hybridization techniques, like it has a low sensitivity compared to amplification methods. Okay. So hybridization has low sensitivity than the amplification methods. Amplification has high sensitivity, which we discuss later on. Then in case of hybridization techniques, high viral load is required, around 10 to the power 5 to 10 to the power 7 copies per ml, and expertise is required obviously. Then cumbersome long procedure is there for, so it is not suitable for routine use. Another molecular methods are the amplification methods, in which the viral nucleic acid to be detected or the product signal is amplified to ease the detection of infective virus. Okay, so here from few copies of DNA or RNA, we amplify it to form large number of copies. Okay, so it becomes detectable, and the method is rapid also. So three types of amplification methods are there: target amplification, probe amplification, and signal amplification. Amplification methods have different advantages, like it has high sensitivity. They can detect low viral load also, 10 to the power 100 copies per ml is detectable. Then quantitative estimation can also be done. So we can measure the viral load also. How many copies are there in that particular specimen per ml can also be detected. So this is a major advantage. The very low viral load can be detected, and quantitative assay determination can be done. Then disadvantage is there is a high risk of carryover contamination, because it's a highly sensitive procedure. Very sophisticated method is there, and very minute volumes are there are used for testing. So high risk of carryover contamination is there. Another method for nucleic acid methods are the microarrays. These are miniature amplification or hybridization method. They use the same principle of amplification hybridization, but they are done in a miniature format. Okay. So here what we do is, there is an array of microchips containing complementary DNA or cDNA or oligonucleotides bound to their surface, and it allows simultaneous detection of multiple infectious agents with this. So you can use a panel of different viruses. So simultaneous detection of multiple infectious agents can be done. So first application was done in detection of HIV mutations associated with resistance to antiviral drugs. Okay. So microarrays is a recent development, and they will be available shortly for routine use also. Now the cultivation of viruses, like we do culture of bacteria, we can also do culture of viruses. But the major difference is that the bacteria can grow on the non-living media or inanimate culture media also, while the virus cannot. So virus require the live cells for their growth. So because viruses cannot survive outside the living cell. Okay, so they always require a living cell for their growth or for their multiplication. Okay, so cultivation of viruses can only be done in living media, not in non-living media. So three methods are there for cultivation of viruses: animal inoculation, embryonated eggs, and cell culture. So animal inoculation, most suitable animals for viral isolation or viral culture is white mice, suckling mice, guinea pigs, rabbits and ferrets. Okay. So when you inoculate the virus in any bird or in any animal, mice or guinea pigs, the growth of the virus will be indicated by either death of the animal, disease production in the animal, or any visible lesions in the animal. Okay. So animal can be used to study pathogenesis, immune response, epidemiology and oncogenesis and vaccine development. Okay. So disadvantage is the immunity of the animal may interfere with viral growth. Okay, so any animal will have certain amount of baseline immunity, so this will sometimes interfere with the viral growth. So next is the egg inoculation. The egg is also a living thing. So egg we can use for virus inoculation and virus will multiply inside it. So there are different sites in the egg which can be used for viral culture. First is the chorioallantoic membrane, then amniotic membrane, yolk sac and allantoic membrane. Okay, so amniotic cavity, yolk sac, allantoic membrane and chorioallantoic membrane. So these are the different parts of the eggs where there is amniotic cavity, there is a shell which is hard shell, calcium rich shell, then albumin, allantoic cavity, yolk sac and chorioallantoic membrane. Then there is a part known as air sac at the side of the egg. Then in amniotic cavity we inoculate influenza virus and mumps virus. In chorioallantoic membrane we inoculate herpes simplex virus, pox virus and brown sarcoma virus. The yolk sac is used for inoculation of herpes simplex virus, and allantoic inoculation is done in influenza, mumps, Newcastle disease virus and avian adenoviruses. So these different sites are suitable for the growth of these viruses. Embryonic eggs was first used by goat pasture, and several sites, as I told you, the figure shows the different sites for inoculations. Now the third one method for cultivation of viruses is cell culture or cell lines. Cell culture is done by three methods: organ culture, explant culture and cell culture. Organ culture, for example, tracheal ring organ culture for isolation of coronaviruses. So here whole organ, that is tracheal rings, are used for organ culture. Explant culture, where the adenoid tissue is used, explant for isolation of adenovirus. Then primary cell lines, where the different type of cell lines are used. For example, primary cell cultures, where the limited growth in culture and cannot be maintained in serial culture. Okay, so there is a limited growth in primary cell lines. The examples are primary monkey kidney cell line and chick embryo cell lines. Then diploid cell cultures, diploid cell strains, where it retain original diploid chromosome and karyotype during serial subcultivation for a limited period of time. Again, it is not an unlimited cultivation. The example is WI38 and HL8 cell lines. Then continuous cell lines. Here the cells of a single type are used, usually derived from cancer cells, because the cancer cells have the unlimited ability to divide. Okay, that's why the tumor is formed. So the cancer cells are being used as the cell line for growth of the virus culture, because they have the capacity to form continuous serial cultivation. Okay, example are the HeLa cells, HEP2 cells and KB cells. So this figure shows the different cell line where from the mouse, means tissue is taken from the mouse, it is minced and it is digested with collagenases and filter out the clumps, pellet and wash the cells, and you will have a primary cell line. Okay, so growth in culture medium with serum, antibiotics and vitamins. So in primary cell line and secondary cell lines and in continuous cell lines. In secondary cell lines, they grow out during prolonged culture as normal cells senesce, because a normal cell has a limited lifespan. It will senesce, will become old and die. So it cannot be maintained for an indefinite period of time. But in continuous cell line, they are immortalized cells, because these are the cancer cells and they have genetic or chromosomal abnormality also. Now, how will you detect that the virus has grown in the cell line? So, by certain effects of the virus, we can find out that the virus has grown in the cell line. For example, first one is the cytopathic effect, then metabolic inhibition, interference, transformation, and immunofluorescence. So the cytopathic effects, what is a cytopathic effect? Cytopathic effects are the structural changes that are caused by viral invasion in the host cell. Okay, so when a virus infects any cell, it causes certain changes in the structure of the cell line. Okay, and these are known as cytopathic effects. They may cause lysis of the host cell, or so that the cell dies without lysis. Either they cause lysis of the host cell and cell dies, or sometimes the cell dies without lysis due to inability to reproduce. And virus causes certain morphological changes also. Then it is known as cytopathogenic virus. Then there are some viruses cause total destruction of host cell monolayer. This is the most severe form of cytopathic effect. Here whole cell monolayer shrinks rapidly, detached from the glass surface within 3 days. This effect of destruction of host cell monolayer is seen in case of enteroviruses. Then there is a subtotal destruction, which is a less severe form, and here the detachment of some cells occurs but not all cells. Then focal destruction. Certain viruses cause focal destruction, means the localized attack of host cell monolayer occurs. It is seen in cases of herpes and pox viruses. Then syncytium formation. And there is a fusion of cells. So a syncytium is formed where the continuous, without any borders of cells. There is a continuous cells are seen. This is known as syncytium. It occurs due to cell fusion, and there is a single enlarged cell with at least 4 nuclei are seen, and it can be seen even without staining. Then sometimes the swelling and clumping of the cells occur. Here the host cell swells significantly. Once it becomes enlarged, the cell clumps together in clusters and detached. This effect of swelling and clumping as a cytopathic effect is seen in adenoviruses. Then sometimes foamy degeneration or vacuolization occurs. Here the formation of large or numerous vacuoles occurs in the cytoplasm. It is seen in rotavirus, flavivirus, and paramyxoviruses. So foamy degeneration or vacuolization occurs due to the formation of large vacuoles in the cytoplasm. This type of cytopathic effects is seen in rotavirus, flavivirus, and paramyxovirus. Now the serological diagnosis. So here what we do is that detect the rising titer of antibody between acute and convalescent stages of infection, or the detection of IgM in primary infection. Okay, so here in serology we detect the antibody response to the antigen cause of the virus. So as you all know, the antibodies are of 2 types, IgM and IgG. The IgM antibodies are first to appear. So usually after first week, the IgM antibodies start appearing. So IgM antibody denotes the primary infection or the acute infection, and IgG infection points towards the chronicity of the infection because it comes late in the course of infection. Okay, so serological tests which are available are complement fixation test, heme agglutination inhibition test, immunofluorescence, neutralization test, counter-immunoelectrophoresis, enzyme immunoassays or ELISA testing, and radioimmunoassays. So in case of primary infection, if we want to label our infection as primary infection, then there are certain criteria like 4-fold or more increase in the titer of IgG or total antibody between acute and convalescent sera. So if we take 2 serum sample at least 15 days apart, and we can demonstrate there is a 4-fold rise in the titer of IgG or total antibody, it means it is an acute infection or the primary infection. Then if IgM antibody is present, then it is because it is an early response antibody. So it clearly indicates towards the primary infection. But if IgG also, IgG is there, then you should demonstrate its rise or fall by 4-fold. Then only it denotes the primary infection. Then seroconversion from antigen, it converts to antibody response. So you can demonstrate the seroconversion. Then there was no antibody and then antibody developed. So that's known as seroconversion. If you can demonstrate it, then also it indicates the primary infection. Then a single high titer of IgG is very unreliable. Okay, because IgG does not denote the primary infection. So if only IgG antibodies, and even if it is a high titer, but a single high titer of IgG does not denote the active infection or the primary infection. Then primary criteria for diagnosing reinfection. Here the four-fold or more increase in titer of IgG or total antibody between acute and pulmonary sera, and absence of slight increase in IgM. This means the reinfection. So this picture shows a typical serological profile after acute infection. So in the vertical axis you can see there is a serum titer of antibodies, and in the horizontal you can see the time in weeks. Okay, so after the end of first week, around the end of first week, around 5th or 6th day, the antibody, that is IgM antibody, starts appearing, and it peaks in between the first and second week, and then it falls down. While the IgG antibodies comes later in the end of the first week or after the first week, and it remains high for a longer period of time, and if secondary infection or reinfection occurs, then it again rises, and then it becomes a lifetime. Okay, so IgM rises at a higher level during acute or primary infection, then it falls down, remains at a plateau. The reinfection occurs, then again it rises, but to a lesser extent. While IgG antibody appears late, remains for a longer period of time, and then when reinfection occurs, it rises in a profound manner. Okay, and then it becomes stable, or a plateau is there for a very long period of time. Okay, so this is the typical of serological profile in most of the viral infections. Another is the immunofluorescence test. Immunofluorescence is widely used for the rapid diagnosis of virus infections by the detection of virus antigen in clinical specimens, as well as the detection of virus-specific IgG or A or IgM antibody. So here we can detect either antigen or antibody in the clinical specimens. Here what we do is, this technique makes use of a fluorescent labeled antibody to stain specimens containing specific virus antigens, so that the stained cells fluoresces under UV illumination. Now what we do is, we take the antibody which is fluorescently labeled. Fluorescent dyes are those which absorb different wavelength and emit the different wavelength of light of different wavelength. Okay, so they absorb either infrared and ultraviolet rays, and then they emit the visible light. Okay, so if we take an antibody which is tagged by this fluorescent staining, and we make a smear of the clinical specimen, and on this smear we add this antibody, and if this particular antigen is present in the specimen or in the sample which we have taken, they will combine. So the antigen and antibody will combine. Because the antibody has a fluorescent tag, it will fluoresce, and you can see under the microscope. So wherever you find the fluorescence, it means there is an antigen present. Okay? So this is the principle of immunofluorescence. So advantage of immunofluorescence is it is quite sensitive. Firm diagnosis can be made on the identification of a few cells only that contain fluorescence of the right color and with the correct antigen distribution. Disadvantage, it is a labor intensive and requires highly skilled staff. We require fluorescent microscope also. Okay, so it's a highly expertise is required for this kind of diagnosis. So here you can see the green colored fluorescence emitted from the infected cells. Now another method which is very common, very popular method of diagnosis is the ELISA testing, that is enzymatic immunosorbent assay. There are different types of, in serology you have already read it about the ELISA. So here ELISA can be of different types: direct ELISA, indirect ELISA, sandwich, competitive and capture ELISA. Various modifications of ELISA are also available in the form of rapid assays, also known as cassette ELISA. Here immunochromatography technique is used and immunofiltration techniques are used, which are now very commonly used in different rapid tests. So this is the immunochromatographic method, where a nitrocellulose membrane is used on which different antigens are blocked on different sites, and there is a band which is known as control band, where if the sample was proper and technique was proper, then this control band will be there, but it does not denote the positive test. Control band is for validity of the testing. If control band is there, then your test is valid. And there are two sites, like this picture shows the HIV antibody detection test, where it shows a band at the site of 1. 1 means HIV 1 infection is there. Because control band is there, this test is valid. And the band at the site of 1 is showing the pink colored band. It means HIV 1 infection is positive. Okay. This figure shows the immunofiltration, immune concentration technique. Here again the control band and 1 and 2 band is there, and whatever band comes with the control band, that will be the result of that test. If there is no control band, then the test is invalid and you have to repeat the test, either with the fresh sample or you can do if there is a technical error, then the same sample can also give the proper result, valid result. Then ELISA technique can be used for antigen detection as well as antibody detection. The examples of antigen detection is hepatitis B surface antigen, P24 antigen in HIV, and rotavirus antigens. The antibody detection is done in the diseases like HIV, hepatitis C virus, dengue and chikungunya viruses, and HAV, that is hepatitis A virus, and HEV, that is hepatitis E virus. Advantages of ELISA are usually the 96 tests can be done at the same time in case of ELISA. So the large number of samples can be tested simultaneously. It is a very sensitive technique. Reagents are also stable. But in some disadvantages can be said in the form of that they require sophisticated instruments and technical expertise. But nowadays ELISA is a very commonly used and very popular technique for viral diagnosis. Radioimmunoassays, that is RIA, they have fallen out of use. They were earlier used, but nowadays they are not usually used because most virus assays, because radioisotopics are used, radioisomers are used, and they are hazardous, and their disposal is very difficult and time consuming and expensive. So nowadays ELISA technique has replaced almost radioimmunoassays. So due to its hazardousness, expensiveness, now the radioimmunoassays are usually not being used. Then there is a test known as heme agglutination inhibition test. Here a wide variety of different viruses possess the ability to agglutinate the erythrocytes of mammalian or avian species. Certain viruses have the property to agglutinate or clump the erythrocytes of certain mammalian or avian species. The actual animal species whose erythrocytes could be agglutinated depends on actual virus. Examples of viruses which could heme agglutinate includes influenza, parainfluenza, adenoviruses, rubella, alpha viruses, bunia viruses, flaviviruses, and some strains of picorna viruses. agglutination inhibition test. The advantages of HAI tests are they are relatively easy and inexpensive to perform. But disadvantages are there, like they are not as sensitive as ELISA or radioimmunoassay. Actual reading of result is quite subjective. Reagent should be fresh. Okay, so most commonly nowadays ELISA and molecular methods are being used. Another test which can be used as a complement fixation test. Here we can do the screen against a large number of viral and bacterial infections at the same time. It is a cheap test, but disadvantage is that it's not that sensitive, cannot be used for immunity screening, time consuming and labor intensive, and often non-specific cross-reactivity between HSV and varicella zoster virus is there. Another test is the neutralization test. Neutralization test means it is the loss of infectivity through reaction of the virus with specific antibody. So the virus will lose its infectivity in the presence of its antiserum, basically. If you mix the virus with the antibody, its own antibody, then this will be neutralized by the antibody. So here what we do is the virus and the serum are mixed under appropriate conditions and then inoculated into cell culture, eggs or animals. The presence of unneutralized virus may be detected by reactions such as cytopathic effect, heme adsorption, heme agglutination, plaque formation and disease in animals. Okay, so if that particular serum does not neutralize the virus in the cell line and the virus is able to produce the cytopathic effect, it means there is no antibody in the serum of that particular sample. So neutralization did not occur and the cytopathic effects were produced. But if cytopathic effects are not produced, it is due to the neutralization of the virus by its own anti-sera or antibody. Now the summary of the viral infection diagnosis. Laboratory diagnosis of viral infection is important in view of screening, detection, epidemiology and research of viral diseases. The collection, storage, packaging and transport is of utmost importance in viral detection. Diagnostic methods for viral detection include microscopy, that is the light microscopy where we can detect inclusion bodies, and the electron microscopy where we can directly detect the virus particles, directly see or visualize them. Then molecular methods where various targets or signals are used for either for hybridization techniques or the amplification where a very small amount of the nucleic acid can be amplified and detected. Then virus culture in different cell lines, the primary cell line, secondary cell line and the continuous cell lines. Okay. Then we can detect the virus in the virus culture through their cytopathic effects. Then serological methods like the radioimmunoassay, which is not being used nowadays much. Then ELISA testing, which is very popular technique. Then the complement fixation test. Then neutralization tests. Okay, so this is all about the diagnosis of viral diseases. Thank you so much.